Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. This is the second series out of three that we're doing on legacy planning. This is part two, how strong families survive tough times. Again, this is the first time we've done a shorter series or shorter blocks in a series in a webinar format. So any feedback you have, whether you like it or not, things that we can improve upon would be greatly appreciated. This presentation is being recorded. After the presentation, you'll receive an email with the recording and all the slides that are presented here today. Again, we've tried to reserve some time at the end for any questions. Feel free to use the chat box located in your controls in order to submit those questions. We'll tally those and run through as many as we can at the end of today's session. As we talked about, if you had an opportunity to attend the first part, this family legacy planning is a very important topic. As a full service provider of fiduciary services, we see a lot of families that do their plans, and they're very intentional about the plans that they create. They spend a lot of time and energy on those. And what family legacy planning is, essentially trying to bring that same intention we traditionally dedicate to the legal, financial, tax side of the planning to the people and family side of the planning. With us today again is Tom Rogerson with Gen-Leg Co. Tom is, recognized leader and pioneer in family governance throughout the world. He uses his 6 steps to a healthy family governance plan to assist families with communication, philanthropic vision, legacy planning, succession, and education. Tom incorporates these critical issues into his client's comprehensive wealth management plan, not only helping to prepare the money for the family, but the family for the money. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tom. Tom, thank you again for being with us.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Matt. It's great to be with you and with Peak Trust Company as well. And as Matt just indicated, we had a 6-step process to healthy family governance. Due to COVID, we've actually changed that. And the reason is that going online and doing virtual family meetings requires a little bit more time on some of the steps. So we've turned into a 7-step process. It's a lot of the same content, but it's just how we're delivering it a little bit differently. The actual 7-step process I showed very briefly last time, and I'll just describe a little bit more in depth today. The first step, and I start at the bottom because you've got to start with the foundation before you work up to the top. And so I think this is a better list to indicate what needs to be done. But an assessment of where the family is today. Secondly, an education to bring them all up to the same level playing field of what's going on. Awareness is like 3/4 of the way to a cure. And so awareness is really helpful. Awareness, then acceptance, and then action. So the education is designed to create awareness in the family of that, wow, these things really are important and what they are. So that's step 2. Step 3, we take them through a communication exercise. It's really important to learn, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this 3rd, 4th, and 5th steps in the process today. But it's this notion of how do you build and enhance and make communication better for the family overall. And we'll talk a little bit about that more. Values, vision, mission. How do you go from values, from words to definition of words, because my definition is different than yours on some of these values we talk about. And then stories. Why do I have that? What stories can I tell? We'll talk a little bit about that. Conflict avoidance and or management and what that looks like. And those are the 3 we're going to have a little bit of a focus in the end, not tremendous, but a little bit of a focus in the end of today's webinar. And then actions. What can you do about some of these things? And then finally, advancement. How do you incorporate this into the plan and the role of the advisors and the trust company and everyone involved and the family members in the long-term success of a family? Today's, I'm going to just, as I said, highlight these green items here in the middle. But generally, though, I wanted to focus on what are we seeing families are doing. Last time it was what's the problem? What are families doing wrong from all the studies, and not intentionally doing wrong? They actually lovingly are accidentally doing a lot of things wrong. They don't know it. But today we're going to talk about what are families doing that's helping them thrive and succeed multi-generationally. And the next one's going to focus on what can you do about it with your families or for the families that you work with. What can they do about it to get started for them personally? And I really will delve into this 7-step process in the next one. and actually talk about some tools for each one of them, including the role of a trust company and structures that really are designed to really support this entire concept, different than traditional estate planning, and it should be traditional estate planning, a part of it. The vision that we use to give people a sense of all this is think of railroad tracks going off into the distance. And this little visual, by the way, it just really encapsulates what we're trying to get families to focus on. And if you think about it, if you're looking at 100 miles of railroad tracks going off into the distance, somewhere out in Utah, flat plain, these tracks, these two rails, look like they come together at a vanishing point on the horizon. And there are really three things going on in this little video so far, this little visual so far. There's the right-hand rail, the left-hand rail, and the ties that bind, or the cross ties. And so the right-hand rail to us, is the analogy would be, this is the focus on the business and the money and succession and the estate plan and control and all the things that we think of as traditional estate planning. The other rail, though, is why, if we're going to be really intentional of focusing on the money, why aren't we really intentional about focusing on the family, building a sense of a better relationship, transparency, real understanding, knowing each other, and I mean deeply knowing each other. And that then brings up these cross ties that bind. The cross ties that bind are all the activities that a family can do between the family just building a sense of who we are and focusing on the money. There are a bunch of activities that we can do that really pull this together. And so I love this analogy in this. And so there are really three different areas. Our primary focus is we want to focus a family over here first. Secondly, when we want to focus them on some of these middle action areas, that's second. And third, last, we want to focus on the money. It's exactly the opposite of what they usually do. They usually put together a whole plan, and then they're trying to figure out how do we get the family ready for the plan we put in place. And I want to talk a little bit of what that looks like and can look like and should look like. But I like this analogy because when I was showing this to one of the families that we work with now in upstate New York, this is a multi-billion-dollar family, extremely successful, first-generation wealth creators anyway. But the father said, wow, I like this analogy because if you think about it, if you walk 5 miles out on that 100 miles of track and look at the next 95 miles in front of you, what does it look like from that vantage point? Well, it looks exactly the same. And what's interesting about this is these activities that we're encouraging make it appear as if the family really is coming together and in the horizon, and all these activities are one, but in reality, they're always separate. And there's a reason that they always should be separate, and there's a reason that they all build on each other and help each other and support each other over time. So we're going to talk about some of these activities we're seeing families engage in now. And this comes from researching multi-generational families that have been successful, and from some of the work we've been doing and some of the research we're seeing others do as well. Will Rogers had a good analogy or a little quip about this, though. He said, though, even if you're ahead of the train, you get run over if you just sit there. So we're not only going to talk about what this looks like, but how can you stay ahead of the train over time, because it's right behind you. And this is just a little pictorial, and it's in your PDF if you want to look at it later on as well, of the activities, the things involved in the left rail, the right rail, and the cross ties that bind. Here's a blow up of the left-hand side, though, which we're going to spend just a second on here. This is that notion of to really know and to be known. Last time we talked about why families are often using their wealth, if they have any economic resources at all, to allow, not force, but allow their family to become more independent and separated from each other. And so how do we reverse that? And this left-hand rail is all about, wait a minute, although we're independent and we have the ability and the finances to do that and continue to not see each other all year long if we want to, what can we do to counteract that trend? And to know and to be known, to love and to be loved. Building strong relationships, really actively, intentionally doing that. Deep communication and trust. I mean, what would it look like? And I don't mean cocktail party conversation. I mean, what would it look like to engage in really building this? Management teams would do this on their offsites, but then the parents that own the business are going home and not doing it with their family. So what could that look like? And really defining the purpose of the family. The right-hand rail blow up is really focusing on stewarding and mentoring the wealth itself. And this is where we have knowledge and education about the assets. We maybe need degrees. We need a PhD in Scientology or whatever. So whatever it is we're focusing on, and chemistry, whatever our business is, if or finance, if we've just got a financial family, or real estate. What are the abilities, though, of family members? What are the needs of the family enterprise? And how do you mesh those two together? This is endowing the family future. This is the concept of a trust that we're going to talk about in the next one, a trust designed to endow the family meeting process, the family likely success process going forward, and why you need an organization, by the way, like Peak Trust Company, to be the trustee of an entity like that. This is a different type of trust, and we're going to focus on that next time. But these are some of the things, this is really the purpose of the wealth. Can we as a family define what we think the purpose of the wealth is, even if we don't know how much there is or what the value is? But what we're going to focus on today is a little bit more on what we call the cross ties, the ties that bind, to trust and to be trusted. How do you build that? You build trust by experiencing it, by experiencing working together. And so how do we start? Family governance sounds highfalutin. It really means just group decision making. That's as simple as it is. If we wanted to decide what time we're going to end this webinar, that's a group decision, or maybe it's not. Maybe I decide, maybe Matt decides, but ultimately though, that's a decision-making process. And if we took a vote, that's a group decision-making process. So what is family governance? It's how we make decisions together. Culture, entrepreneurship mentality. We're going to spend some time on that one today. What does it look like to have an entrepreneurship mentality? And even if you don't want to start new businesses, which I think you should, by the way, but even if you don't want to, a family entrepreneurship mentality is a very healthy mentality for the family to succeed as a family. And I'm going to get back into that in just a minute. Family philanthropy, creating a family bank, family meetings, all these things we think of are the middle of the two rails. It's the cross ties that bind. There are many activities that you can do to learn, and you're going to see how that comes back to play on the entrepreneurship mentality. So that's kind of the image that we use with clients to give them a sense of what we can do. They inevitably start asking questions, and we can then start placing the questions where they belong. And usually they're questions about, what about the trust? What about the trustee? What about the blah, blah, the investment? What about the business? What about Uncle Joe? And it's usually about the money side of the equation. And so we can identify that and say, yes, but right now we're over here. We're on the other side. And so please bear with us on this one. But I'm going to pick out one of these cross ties to bind to be sort of the focus for today. And that's the entrepreneurship mentality. Entrepreneurship is really more than entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is teamwork, it's education, and it's philanthropy, all together in one word, entrepreneurship. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'll give you an example of what I mean by philanthropy. I actually had some business owners years ago that were, when I would say early on when I was doing this, I was doing what a lot of people are doing now, which I think is now a mistake, by the way. They were focusing on family philanthropy as the solution. And I was doing the same thing back, 20 years ago. And I was thinking, family philanthropy, it's the solution. You're gonna, bond on values and all these wonderful things together. And one entrepreneur said, I'm kind of insulted by this. And I was like, whoa, what did I do? And he said, you're everything you say, it makes it sound like first I build my business and then I go do good. This wasn't good, but this other thing, philanthropy, is good. And he said, I'm insulted by that because I think I'm doing good by building my business. I'm hiring people. I'm giving them self-esteem. I'm giving them jobs. I'm giving them paychecks. They're going home and building communities and families. And I'm helping to support America. And I think that's philanthropic. Don't get me wrong. I also want to do philanthropy by giving money to charitable organizations and all, but don't discount the business creation as non-philanthropic. And that's what I mean by entrepreneurship. Not in all cases. There are some entrepreneurs that are very money centric and just all about themselves. But I'm finding most of the time there's a real care for the people working for the companies that help build it. And so that's what I mean by family entrepreneurship, is really family philanthropy. It's teamwork. We think of an entrepreneur as a lone wolf. That's not the case. It's education, it's ongoing learning and learning from each other. These are all things a family can do. And so you're going to see, I refer to this as a familyness culture and an entrepreneurial orientation. Oh, excuse me, not an orientation. There's already a defined term for that or definition for that. So I call it a familyness culture and an entrepreneurial mentality within the family. How do we create that culture and that mentality in a family? And here's how it fits to what we talked about last time. That last time we talked about this independence to the point of estrangement. And if you didn't see it, go back and look at it. But parent entrepreneurs often raise their children in an entrepreneurial kill zone that we talked about last time, and they raise their children in this totally independent phase, hoping that they're going to continue to be independent. They think entrepreneurship is just independence. That's not actually the case in true entrepreneurship. And so real entrepreneurial families have more of a group dynamic, a culture that's different. As I said before, down here in the left-hand side is an entrepreneurial incubator. Up here in the red dot is an entrepreneurial kill zone, separation to the point of estrangement. It's hard to be entrepreneurial as a group and create teamwork and work together if you're so independent and estranged from each other. So how does a family somehow get down to this lower level of an entrepreneurial mentality within the family? And it's important to be entrepreneurial as a family. A couple of examples of this. If you had generation one with mom and dad and 2 kids, you got 4 people. If 25 years from now, we're looking at G2, they've got mom and dad, and they've got, the son and daughter, but now they've got their kids too. We're up to 10 people in 25 years. Another 25 years from now, we're up to G3, we're up to 30 or 22 people. The family's growing in numbers of people that have a lifestyle they want to support. And in the beginning, if we were spending $1 million on lifestyle at G1, 25 years from now, do the math, and I'm going to skip some of the nuances of the math that we did on this, but 25 years from now, they might need, instead of $30 million to support the spending they're doing, if they're just doing it from a portfolio, 25 years from now, they might need $75 million to support the level of spending to support the same lifestyle for everybody now in the family. Go out another 25 years, they might need now $180 million to support the lifestyle. This is a growth rate of like 15 to 17%. Hard to get that in the stock market. Entrepreneurship, owning businesses and enterprises really is the way to grow over time. And so how do we have a feeder system of a family thinking about growing? Well, now again, I originally said entrepreneurship can be a mentality for group decision making in a family, and here I'm focusing on more from a money standpoint. But I will focus back on the dynamic part, the culture of a family part in just a minute. But the other quick thing I want to say about the need for entrepreneurship is not just you need more money to maintain lifestyle as the number of people increases, taxes. There was a recent article just last week in the New York Times and of one of their op-ed columnists saying, and it was titled, "Tax the Rich and Their Heirs." And what she was saying is the optimal tax rate on very large inheritances should be between 60 and 80%. Not only that, she also went on to say that we shouldn't have discounts on assets being transferred from one generation, and we shouldn't have a step up in basis. And to make it even worse, whatever the final recipient receives, the heirs receive, they should pay an income tax on receiving it. Oh my goodness. I don't know how an American enterprise, family-owned enterprise, can survive through the level of taxation that a lot of people are now looking for. This would kill the American economy. And don't get me wrong, I know we're going to have some higher taxes down the road, but this level that we're hearing people talk about could be unbelievable. How does a family then build entrepreneurial mentality to kind of keep the growth going? Most entrepreneurship programs in the country and even in the world are not actually entrepreneurship programs. You go to most colleges. My son actually got an entrepreneurship degree at a university here in America. And when I went through this analogy with him, he said, "You're right, my college did not teach entrepreneurship." Most entrepreneurship programs teach a process of entrepreneurship. Identify an opportunity, develop the concept, understand the resource requirements, acquire the resource, develop a business plan, implement the plan, manage the venture, and then exit strategy. That's not entrepreneurship. That's small business management. Entrepreneurship, according to Babson or some of the professors at Babson, there's a wonderful book by by Neck, Green, and Brush called Teaching Entrepreneurship. And they actually talk about the actual process of entrepreneurship. Excuse me, not process, practice of entrepreneurship. It's a practice. It's a learn by doing, not learn to do, but do to learn. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But they say it's a practice, and what they focus on is the practice of play. And you can teach people every one of these. The practice of empathy, the practice of creation, the practice of experimentation, and the practice of reflection. And what it looks like is this: the practice of play is, can we create a free and imaginative mind and think outside the box so that we can start to see things other people aren't seeing, or at least be able to help focus on things, not just what's in front of me, but what's to come. What will things potentially look like down the road? Am I envisioning that? Because if I can't envision it, I can't prepare for it. And then the practice of empathy. As you're observing the world, do you see problems? And do you see opportunities through those problems? I mean, if you get to the airport and you see a 2-hour security line, do you just get in the line and start playing Sudoku? Or do you see this is a problem and start thinking about what are the solutions to this? If you don't have empathy to seeing societal problems, it's hard to come up with a product or solution to these problems that would benefit society, and thus your business on that process would fail. So how do you have empathy for what the needs are out there? Third, practice of creation. Can you create can you use that practice of play to think outside the box and create solutions that could solve this problem that you're now starting to observe? And then finally, the practice of experimentation. How do you try things to solve this and fail and learn and try again and fail and learn and try again and fail and then try again and succeed? Well, that's exactly what entrepreneurs typically do. And the last one of this is the practice of reflection, which really encompasses all of them. When I say entrepreneurs tend to be people that do to learn rather than learn to do, mid-level managers of most corporations are people that went and got their degrees and all that, and they learned before they felt they could go out and do. Entrepreneurs are often the kind of people like Bill Gates during college, before they know it all, that they just feel like, wait a minute, this idea and this idea, they ought to go together. I'm doing it. Drop out of college, go do it, and build something with a team of people. It's not like they do this by themselves. If you read the books on all these famous entrepreneurs you want to go to, they always built teams. I mean, Steve Jobs famously had the partnership with was Nesky, I think it was. Anyway, if it wasn't for the partnership with that team and then the other teams they built around it, they wouldn't have succeeded. But what was interesting is different people in the team had different aspects of this circle. That maybe they're more the experimenter, or maybe they're more they have the empathy. But these were all necessary to build businesses. You're going to see how all of this relates to the family as well, in the culture in the family of success going forward, of preserving the family and what it means to be us, and then coming up with how do we solve problems in the family going forward, not just society, in the family going forward. But this notion of that mid-level manager feels like they need to get their degree fully complete, get their certificate, and then they're ready to go do. Entrepreneurs feel like, wait a minute, this idea, I'm pulling them together. I'm going to do it. And they often will do in order to learn. And that is a huge difference. And yet many parents that were entrepreneurs encourage their children to get these advanced degrees, to learn everything they can learn before they go do, the opposite of what they actually did themselves. What's really interesting to me is that's Babson's approach to entrepreneurship. And it's very different than most entrepreneurship programs. How do you do this, though, within the culture of a family, the pea soup culture of the family, with the different education levels and birth order and who got what, and she pulled my pigtail when I was a kid and all that. And it really is, how do you incorporate that notion of creating an entrepreneurial mentality in the family to go from that red zone back down to something closer to what we had with low net worth families of knowing each other and knowing how to work well with each other going forward. A family entrepreneurship mindset and mentality should look like this. It should have a group family problem identification practice. That means you have to have family meetings to go through this, but how do we identify problems and opportunities within our family for growth and in our family and expansion and inclusion and things like that. A group family solution creation practice in our family. What can we do to solve this? Not just bicker about it behind closed doors, but solve it. A group family plan implementation practice. A group family experimentation practice. It's good to fail because you're going to learn through failure, and there's going to be better lessons and stories you can share so others don't replicate the failure. And then a group family education practice, ongoing, lifelong learning. Lifelong learning. That's why the visual we use is that entrepreneurship is teamwork, it is education, it is philanthropy, all wrapped up in the word of a family entrepreneurial mentality as a family. And that's what we're going to talk about, because that actually is what we were seeing. And the best study on this was done by Nason Zellweger and Norqvist in Scandinavia. But they, if you want the white paper on it, just let me know and I can send it to you. But it really gets into how what they were seeing families that multi-generationally succeeded worldwide were doing differently than most of us. Aristotle had a great quote for this where he said, "For the things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them." That is totally countercultural to what we think, but it's what entrepreneurs do. I mentioned earlier that I would highlight just a few of the items in the 7-step process. And so I'm going to come back and do that. I'm going to talk about communication and the values and the conflict management issue. Communication, though, I think George Bernard Shaw had it best when he just said, the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Families often think, yeah, we covered that because I had a conversation with one of my children. That doesn't mean that they heard it all together. There wasn't an environment of inclusion in communication. So that's why you're going to see, and we'll talk about this a little bit more next time, but how do we change that dynamic? And that is step 3 in our process. And we take them through tools on that. Step 4 in our process was the values exercise. We actually take the family through a values exercise where they build their own values pyramid with stickers of what are their most important values on the way down to their least important values. And this is of their most important values. Out of 60 they can choose from, they pick 15, and then they prioritize those 15. And a combination can be their intrinsic values, core values, or their aspiration values, what I want to be, not what I am. And then we have everybody build their own pyramids, but we can put gramps down here and dads and moms and each of the kids and their spouses. And from that, we aggregate it to what are their shared family values. And then, okay, well, then this is great. These are the words. What are the definitions you have of that? And then what are the stories that help create that over time? And how will this drive our future actions going forward? And there are a lot of people that talk about values, but they don't apply them to what they're doing as a group. And more on that again next week. But the other one, the 5th step is this conflict issue, that most families are really in a conflict avoidance modality, not confronting the elephant in the room. They would kibitz behind closed doors about it. They know it's there and they just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to focus on it. They're just scared it's going to be a blow up. And so they avoid it until actually, guess what? It is a blow up. You avoid a problem, it blows up. And so now they need expensive mediation, or they have a fast split, whether it's a divorce or they split from the family, and they bypass this entire middle ground. What you're going to see is that middle ground are, in that railroad tie analogy, it's the cross ties that binds, the activities we can do to connect the family to themselves and to build that sense of trust. And we need to be honest. We have to get to a place of honesty, and we're going to talk about that next time as well. So how do we move a family from conflict avoidance to conflict management, to conflict practice, to conflict acceptance? Last thing I'll mention, just some thoughts to reflect on what we talked about, and these are in your PDF, but think about examples where family culture has helped harm the family and the family business over time, the culture they have themselves. What could a group, team, family environment, look like? Is a group, team, or family environment, more likely or less likely to create an entrepreneurial environment than just an individual as an entrepreneur? List ways that extreme independence could encourage or discourage family entrepreneurship. What benefit can come from organized and prioritize family meetings, or what negatives? The opposite of control is participation. Noodle on that. We'll talk about it next time. Is that true? And if so, what does it mean? How could separating family focus from business focus and cross ties that bind help create success? Things for you to take away from this. This is the same one. These are the same ones I mentioned before, but here are some new ones. These are questions you can ask clients that and prospects to start the conversation, because continuing to learn until you're ready to do is the opposite of entrepreneurs. Do in order to learn. So get out there and ask some of these questions of clients. I'm sure you have a written business succession plan for your business and tangible financial assets. Do you have one for your more important intangible family assets? Can I see it? Would you show it to me? Of course they're going to go, what the heck are you talking about? But you know what? You started a conversation. So I'll let you take a look at those later on. I will go back to this one we talked about before. What do? Get started, and get started now. Don't wait. Learn by doing. And then this African proverb really says it all. If you want to go fast, go alone. All the entrepreneurs that I know about, they say, yeah, I get that. That's how I started to build my team. I was going in alone until I built that team. And then, but I get it. I'm going to push with my enthusiasm and energy to make it happen. But if you want to go far, you have to go together. And that's what families are experiencing. Here are the key conclusions from today. Family culture is hard. We talked about that one last time. But if you're going to add that entrepreneurship culture, it's different. It is different than most. The key to changing the paradigm of shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve is family meetings. You have to be having them. That's the environment where they can learn and engage in these activities. Families must have family meetings. And then we do encourage hiring a facilitator. I'm not just speaking for us, but I think it's very hard to change culture from the inside out. That was a lot to cover, and I'm sorry I went to the end of our time, but maybe we can have just time for one or two Q&As if we have. Matt, if I gone over too much?
No, Tom. It was great, and builds very nicely on to part one, and makes me look forward to part three. We do have a couple of questions that came in. One is, how do you deal with conflict avoidance in families? And then what do you do, maybe more importantly, if you have kind of outright or overt conflict that comes up in these meetings?
Yeah, well, conflict avoidance, we actually have, my wife has a process called empathic communication. It's actually teaching people, because usually when it's like what do they call the, something about the long-suffering wife or the long-suffering husband. They'll take it, but boy, when it comes out like, and then it actually creates the other person defending themselves. So were they justified? Yes. But the way they articulated it, now they're both justified in having a fight about it. So teaching a different way of approaching something that is building up inside, a way of starting, is really important. And you have to actually teach someone, and you have to have them practice it first with somebody that they have a good relationship, and then they can work their way up. And so we do that, and we call it empathic communication. And I'll have a chance to talk a little bit about that next time. When there's already overt explosion, and it's really in everybody's face, these people have to, and we'll talk to them separately ahead of time, they both separately have to say and want to change it. It doesn't mean they know how to, but they have to have an underlying want to. If they don't want to, there is nothing that I've ever seen or know of that can help. But usually I'm finding even people that say, I hate that gar, will say, boy, I wish it was better, though. I don't know how to do it, but I wish it was better. And well, if we can show you a way, would you be willing to try? And usually that actually works. So you have to have a method, though, and this is where you may want to, again, give us a call. That's someplace where you want to have somebody that's had experience in the space.
So, and one last question. Have you ever had particular family members take offense when discussing the entrepreneurial mindset, particularly if they themselves haven't been entrepreneurial? And if so, how might you have dealt with that?
Yes. I think awareness, what I covered the last time, we actually cover in a family meeting. And when I just go through that, I'm amazed at how many times people will self-diagnose. I'm not saying, hey, I think you, Fred, sitting over there on the sofa, are a lazy layabout that's just, entitled and not. But when I go through the information, it's amazing how many of them just self-diagnose. Wow, you know what? This is relating. And I've had people that the parents thought were incredibly entitled and unmotivated actually start to come up and say, I am interested in this. It's not that I'm not motivated. I don't know how to begin. The idea that I'm going to improve upon what my parents have done, they're like unicorns in society. That's daunting. I don't know where to begin. You're starting to show me a roadmap of how to engage. I'm interested. And again, it's not always the case. If they want to get involved, and usually they do, with the awareness part, then we can help them get engaged. But that's, and usually if I make that transition from entrepreneurship, meaning building a business, to entrepreneurship, meaning problem solving in a group of people, and that how do we build a team to problem solve and identify problems and solutions as a group, regardless of whether we're going to start a business or not, they start getting engaged. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. I'd like to build that and be part of something like that. And don't forget, last time we talked about the solution to independence to the point of loneliness and estrangement is connectedness. And everything we're talking about is building truer, honest connectedness, to know and to be known, to love and to be loved, to trust and to be trusted is a foundational human need. And we're trying to help families get to a place where they can experience that.
Yeah, it makes me, think of some of the clients we've dealt with. We all live in the shadows of someone, and when we're dealing with very successful people in our lives, those shadows can be very significant. So,
You're right, and those larger than life parents that we all know of don't
exactly.
see themselves as larger than life. They see themselves as normal,
Right.
and that's hard.
Sure. Well, Tom, I think that's all we have for today. Again, really appreciate you joining us here, and look forward to part 3 Tuesday next week, 12 p.m. Eastern.
Great. Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks,
Again,
Matt.
everyone.
Thanks, Barbara. Bye.